The neighborhood always felt like a safe pocket away from the noise of everything else. On weekends, the sidewalks filled with joggers weaving around strollers, dogs tugging their owners toward the grass, and the kind of small talk that never went anywhere but somehow held the place together. The pool sat at the center of it all, a rectangle of blue where kids learned to swim, parents compared schedules, and lifeguards pretended they were not counting down the minutes until their shift ended. You could hear the soft rise and fall of laughter long before the gates came into view. It was the kind of place where people let their guard down without thinking twice. That afternoon started like any other slow Saturday. The sun sat high, throwing light across the water, and the smell of sunscreen drifted through the warm air. Parents lounged in faded chairs that had seen too many summers. Kids cannonballed into the deep end, one after another, the surface barely settling before the next splash. A couple argued in low voices about whether to order pizza or fire up the grill once they got home. A toddler waddled past dragging a floatie, twice her size. Everything felt predictable in the best way. A group of teens arrived late, loud enough to draw a few glances, but not enough to break the mood. They hung around the entrance at first, cracking jokes, pushing each other, acting like they were too old to care about a community pool, but too bored to find anywhere else to be. Most people ignored them. Teenagers acting like teenagers, nothing new. They eventually drifted toward the water, dropping their bags wherever they pleased, splashing each other, creating a little ripple of irritation without crossing any real line. At least not yet. Something shifted when they decided the pool deck was theirs. They spread out, taking over a section near the shallow end where families usually sat. A couple of them kicked towels out of the way. One grabbed a chair without asking, dragging it across the concrete with a screech that made a lifeguard wince. The energy changed, subtle at first, then growing sharper. Conversations paused. Parents watched out of the corners of their eyes. No one stepped in because no one could quite name the problem. It was just attitude, nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, but enough to scrape across the calm the pool usually held. The teens fed off each other, louder with every minute. They shoved each other toward the water, nearly knocking over a little boy with floaties on his arms. His mother shot them a look, but they brushed past her like she was invisible. They started pacing back and forth in front of the diving board, blocking anyone else from using it. A couple of kids waited patiently, clutching their goggles, but after a few tries they gave up and walked away. One of the teens laughed like that was the whole point. Eventually, even the lifeguards exchanged looks, the kind that asked, should we say something or hope it dies down on its own? Nobody wanted drama. This was the pool. This was supposed to be the easiest part of the week. But the teens did not settle. Instead, they clustered tighter, talking in quick bursts, shooting glances at the people around them as if daring someone to call them out. They nudged each other into unsuspecting swimmers. They mocked a dad who told them to watch it. They stomped through puddles on purpose to spray a family sitting close by. The temperature felt hotter than before, but it had nothing to do with the sun. You could sense the tension spreading across the concrete, moving from family to family, everyone aware that something might snap if the wrong moment hit. The pool that always felt like a refuge now sat under a quiet pressure. The usual soundtrack of splashing water and easy laughter thinned. People kept their voices low. Kids stayed closer to their parents. One of the teens kicked a beach ball away from a child who had dropped it. Another shouted across the deck, fist pumping the air as if they had scored something. It was childish and careless, but something about the way they moved made it clear they believed no one would stop them. They treated the place like a stage built just for them, and the rest of the neighborhood were props to shove aside whenever it amused them. The calm setting that had started the afternoon softened into the background. The pool was still the same, the sun still warm, the smells and sounds still familiar, but the feeling had shifted. What had been a relaxed community space slowly turned into a place where people watched and waited, hoping the teens would get bored and leave before they ruined the day any further. The balance had tipped just enough that everyone felt it, even if they could not explain exactly why. The girl had been at the pool long before the teens showed up. She chose a quiet corner near the steps, close enough to hear the water, but far enough from the noise to relax. She wore simple athletic gear, nothing flashy, and kept to herself. She spent most of her time reading, stretching her legs now and then, and dipping into the water only when the heat pushed her to. No one paid much attention to her because she blended in that well. She looked like any other neighbor trying to squeeze a little piece out of the weekend. As the teens grew rowdier, she kept an eye on them without lifting her head too much. Not in a confrontational way. More in the way someone trained to study people does it out of habit. She tracked how they moved across the deck, how they fed off each other, how their volume kept rising. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the families they bothered. Each time she did, her jaw tightened a little more. She was not tense, but she was alert, the way someone becomes when they know trouble has a shape and it is getting clearer. She finished her stretch, folded her towel neatly, and stood. She had planned to head toward the far lane to swim a few laps. The teens had drifted near that area, bunched together like they owned the concrete under their feet. She did not avoid them. She did not stare them down. She simply walked, steady and calm, as if she believed the path was hers to take. Maybe that was what bothered them. Someone who did not play into their posturing. Someone who moved with confidence instead of fear or annoyance. She reached the edge of their circle and waited for a small gap. It was not much, just a sliver of space where someone courteous would step aside. Instead, the teens tightened the formation. One of them spread his arms wide in a mocking gesture. Another smirked like this was the chance to show off. The group shifted just enough to make it clear she was not getting through unless they felt like allowing it. A couple of adults watched from the nearby chairs, sensing something was off, but unsure if stepping in would make things worse. People hoped the standoff would fizzle out. They hoped the teens would move. They hoped the girl would turn around. But she did not. She gave them the smallest, polite nod. A simple signal that she intended to pass. Her voice stayed level when she said, "Excuse me." She did not raise it. She did not harden it. She kept it measured, as if she still believed civility could work. For half a second it almost looked like it might. One of the teens shifted his weight, and it seemed like he might step aside. Then another bumped him with his elbow, snickering, and the moment dissolved. The tallest teen leaned forward. He told her to find another way. His voice carried the careless heat of someone who thinks he owns the moment. She did not flinch. She repeated her request, still calm. That was when irritation flashed across his face. It was quick, shallow, and fueled by the attention of the group behind him. He needed to show he was in control. He needed to prove something to an audience that rewarded disrespect. She angled her body slightly to slip through the narrow space. It was not aggressive. It was not challenging. It was simply the most reasonable way to continue what she was already doing. But he stepped in front of her again, closing the gap. A few of the teens laughed, the kind of laughter that always invites escalation. She moved to adjust her path. That was when it happened. He threw his elbow out sharply, not by accident, not in confusion, but with a clear intention to block her and sting her at the same time. His elbow struck her cheekbone hard, a quick and careless hit delivered with the confidence of someone who had never been held accountable for anything. The sound was small but sharp enough that those close by heard it. Her head turned slightly from the contact. The teens burst into louder laughter, proud of the moment, savoring it as if it were some kind of victory. A few parents sat up straighter. A lifeguard rose halfway from the chair, unsure if he had really seen what he thought he saw. The girl did not stumble. She did not shout. She did not clutch her face. She only straightened, slowly, as if measuring the air, the noise, and the weight of what had just shifted. The teens waited for a reaction, expecting anger or fear, or they expected her to either back down or explode. The space around them grew tighter, quieter, and charged in a way that none of them recognized yet. The moment the elbow connected, the sound around the pool thinned until it barely existed. It was not sudden silence, not the dramatic kind seen in movies, but a slow draining of noise as people realized something had happened that did not fit the normal rhythm of a weekend afternoon. A few splashes continued in the deep end, but even those felt out of place. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence. Parents turned their heads in sync, instinct guiding them faster than thought. Kids who had been chasing each other paused, sensing tension before they understood it. The air took on that stillness that appears right before a storm, the kind that makes people look around even if they cannot name the source. The teens noticed the shift too, but they mistook it for the attention they wanted. A couple of them puffed themselves up, smirking like this was the highlight of the day. One elbowed his friend, bragging under his breath. Another glanced around, waiting to see who admired the stunt. They were loud in a space that had gone quiet, their voices carrying farther than they expected. That contrast made the scene feel even sharper, as if the noise they created had been cut out and pinned against the silence. People closest to the moment reacted first. A mom in a sun hat sat upright, so fast her chair squeaked. A father scooped his toddler onto his lap, without looking away from what was unfolding. A teenager sitting with headphones slipped one ear cup off, eyes fixed on the group. The lifeguard, still only half standing, hesitated. Rules said he should intervene in conflicts, but there was something about the girl's posture that made him uncertain. She was not yelling or panicking. She was just standing there, steady, controlled, and that steadiness threw off the script he expected to follow. The girl touched nothing, adjusted nothing. She did not rub her cheek, though the skin around the point of contact had already started to flush. She kept her shoulders relaxed, her stance grounded, her breath measured. She looked at the teen who struck her, then at the ones behind him. Not a glare, not a warning. More like she was evaluating something only she could see, as if she were running calculations based on movement, distance, and likelihood. Someone watching closely would notice how her eyes shifted, cataloging each person's position, the angle of their weight, the shape of their confidence. It was the kind of focus most people never have a reason to use. The crowd read her stillness in different ways. Some interpreted it as shock, the kind that hits after unexpected pain. Others believed she was gathering her voice to confront them. A few thought she might cry, not because she looked like she would, but because that was the predictable response they had seen from people treated roughly in public. Everyone projected something onto her. Her stillness invited that. It created a wide, complicated pause in which people filled the space with their own assumptions. The teens were the last to recognize how wrong their read was. They mistook the quiet for weakness. They mistook the lack of immediate reaction for hesitation. Even after the pool fell nearly silent, they kept talking, trying to play off what had happened as a joke. One said she should watch where she was going. Another laughed too loudly, aiming for dominance, but landing somewhere closer to nervous energy. The boy who delivered the elbow stepped back half an inch, barely visible, but enough to show he felt the shift even if he did not understand it. Nobody moved closer to intervene, but bodies leaned forward without rising. It was a collective instinct, the kind that pulls attention into a single point. People were not sure if they should step in, call out, or keep their distance. Even those who had been annoyed by the teens earlier now looked torn between wanting to protect the girl and wanting to avoid becoming part of the confrontation. The quiet around the pool grew heavier as every second passed. A child whispered to his mother, asking what was happening. She shushed him without breaking her gaze. Two men near the diving board exchanged a quick look, the silent kind that asks whether anyone should do something. Neither moved, not out of fear, but because the girl's composure made the situation feel suspended in place, as if acting too soon would disrupt something delicate. From the outside, it looked like time held its breath. The water stilled even though swimmers remained in it. The wind seemed to pause at the fence line. People stood or sat frozen between instinct and uncertainty, waiting for the next move. The teens held their smirks a little too long. The adults kept watching, eyes narrowed, bodies angled forward. The girl stood centered in the small clearing of space the hit had created. Everything in the moment collected around that silence, pressing in from every direction until all that existed was the girl, the teens, and a thin thread of tension stretching between them. They still had no idea who they were dealing with. To them, she was just another girl at the pool, someone quiet, someone alone, someone who did not match the kind of person they thought could put them in their place. They saw shorts, a tank top, damp hair, and a calm expression. Nothing about her hinted at the hours she had spent training in environments far harsher than a community pool deck. Nothing about her posture suggested she could break down a threat faster than most people could form a thought. They operated under the easy assumption that power looked loud, obvious, or big. She did not fit their picture, and because of that, they dismissed her without realizing what they were inviting. If they had watched her more closely before the elbow landed, maybe they would have noticed how she carried herself. Her steps had been even and balanced, her shoulders loose but ready. She never scanned the area with a jerky or nervous motion. She took everything in the way someone trained to avoid danger would, but she did it quietly, without any show. Her movements looked simple, because simplicity is what training drills into a person once it burns away hesitation. The teens were used to reading confidence as swagger. They did not know how to read the real kind. A few adults around the pool started to realize something the teens did not. They could not name it, but they sensed it in subtle cues. The lifeguard noticed how she planted her feet, not wide, not confrontational, but secure. A father near the deep end saw how she kept her hands relaxed instead of clenched. A woman with dark sunglasses lowered them a little, watching the girl with a curiosity that suggested she understood more than most. The silence around the pool sharpened because people could feel a pressure shift, even if they did not know why. The teens, still blind to this, kept up their act. They leaned into each other, laughing, nudging, tossing out comments that sounded bold but carried a faint edge of uncertainty. The boy who threw the elbow tried to hold his grin steady, but his eyes darted across her face as if checking for fear. He found none. Her face stayed composed, her gaze steady in a way that made his stomach twist without him understanding the reason. She was not shocked. She was not hurt. She was calculating. If any of them had known what that kind of calculation meant, they might have taken a step back. They might have apologized. They might have realized that hitting someone trained to neutralize threats was not the same as hitting someone who panicked or folded under pressure. But ignorance wrapped around them like armor made of paper, flimsy but convincing if held close enough. She studied them without raising her chin or shifting her weight. She noted how many there were, how they stood, who looked ready to act, and who only acted tough because the group gave them courage. She measured the space between them and her, the wet concrete beneath their feet, the families nearby who could get caught in a scramble. She breathed slowly, not to stay calm, but because controlled breathing kept her focus sharp. Every part of her training worked quietly in the background, invisible to anyone who did not know what to look for. A small child wandered a few steps too close, drawn by curiosity. The girl's eyes flicked toward the child for half a second, softening in a way that revealed her priorities. She shifted her stance by an inch, positioning herself so that if anything broke, the child would stay behind her instead of in harm's way. It was an instinct so ingrained she barely noticed she had done it. A mother watching from across the deck did notice. She leaned forward, a slow understanding forming in her expression. The boy who hit her finally spoke again, louder this time, trying to reclaim whatever control he thought he had. His words carried the forced confidence of someone who had just realized they might have miscalculated but refused to admit it. He expected her to argue back, maybe shove him, maybe yell. He was ready for that kind of reaction because he knew how to respond to messy confrontations. He did not know how to respond to calm. Behind him, one of his friends muttered something about her being scared. Another laughed and said she should watch where she walked. Their voices bounced around the still air, thin and hollow, scraping against the quiet that now seemed to belong to her more than the pool itself. They were still trying to build a story in which they held the advantage. They did not realize that advantage had already slipped through their fingers. If they had ever met someone trained the way she was, they might have recognized the warning signs. The controlled breathing, the squared shoulders, the measured gaze, the absolute absence of panic. They might have understood that she was assessing them in ways they could not imagine. They might have known that she acted only when she needed to, and when she did, it was swift and final. But they did not know any of that. They only saw a girl who refused to look intimidated, and they could not read what that refusal meant. They thought the moment still belonged to them, unaware that every second of silence pulled it further into her hands. Everything changed in the space of a breath. The girl did not rush, shout, or make any dramatic move. She simply shifted her weight, A small adjustment, so smooth most people missed it. But the ones closest felt something in the air snap into alignment. Her posture tightened in a way that carried purpose, not tension. She no longer looked like someone deciding what to do. She looked like someone who had already mapped out the next 10 seconds in her mind and knew exactly how each of them would unfold. The teens did not catch the shift at first. They were too busy trying to keep their confidence afloat. The boy who had thrown the elbow had opened his mouth again, ready with another loud comment. But his voice stalled when she stepped forward. It was not a big step, barely the length of her foot, but it cut the space between them with sharp accuracy. She positioned herself at an angle that placed him slightly off balance without him realizing why. Her stance created a line of control through the moment, as if she had quietly taken hold of the scene. Her hands stayed relaxed at her sides, but her presence changed. It was the kind of presence that came from hundreds of hours of drills, from learning to assess threats faster than they could act, from understanding how to move decisively without wasting energy. She did not project dominance. She did not puff herself up. She simply existed with precise intention, and that intention settled over the pool deck like a weight. A few adults watching recognized something they could not name, but could feel. A dad near the chair straightened in his seat. The lifeguard finally planted his feet on the ground, realizing this was no longer a simple argument. A teenage girl sitting on the edge of the pool pulled her legs out of the water, sensing that it was not a good idea to be caught too close. Even the children felt it, quieting as they watched the strange tension unfold. The boy who hit her shifted his stance without meaning to, suddenly uncertain. He lifted his chin and squinted at her, as if trying to understand what he was seeing. She did not respond with any expression that gave him an answer. Her calm unsettled him more than anger would have. He was prepared for chaos, for pushback, for yelling. He had no idea how to handle someone who responded with complete composure. She spoke just one sentence, low enough that only he and the teens closest could hear it. The words were not harsh or threatening. They were steady, controlled, and precise. Whatever she said was not meant to intimidate. It was meant to make something clear. His eyes flickered with confusion first, then something closer to fear, the quiet kind that settles in when the body understands a danger the mind has not caught up to yet. When he reached out to shove her, the move was clumsy. His balance was off. His stance was wide. His center of gravity leaned too far forward. He had no real plan behind it. She saw it coming before his muscles even completed the motion. Training had taught her to watch shoulders, not hands, because shoulders reveal intent long before an arm moves. She reacted before he could make contact, not with a punch or anything that would escalate the moment into a spectacle. She used one hand, a simple redirection, guiding his wrist past her hip with clean precision. The motion looked effortless, but it shifted his momentum in a way he never expected. His weight tipped. His feet scrambled on the wet concrete. Another boy reached to grab him, but she gently cut that angle too, repositioning her body so the friend lost his leverage. In a second, the boy found himself bent forward, off balance, struggling to understand how he had lost control so fast. She did not hurt him. She did not twist anything past the point of safety. She controlled him the way someone trained for real restraint does, using angles and pressure instead of force. The teens froze, staring at her as if she had done something supernatural, even though the movement had been quiet, minimal, and clean. A murmur rose from the adults. Not laughter, not shock, something closer to understanding. Many of them now realized what the teens still had not. She moved like someone with serious training. Each motion was too smooth, too efficient, too practiced to be accidental. The silence deepened, but it was no longer the uncertain silence from before. It was the kind of silence people fall into when they witness someone who knows exactly what they are doing. The boy tried to yank his arm free. She let him, because the moment he pulled back she had already repositioned. He stumbled a half step and caught himself, staring at her with wide, shaken eyes. His friends hovered behind him, no longer smirking, no longer laughing. They stood frozen, trying to make sense of what they had just seen. She had not hit him. She had not attacked him. She had simply neutralized him so cleanly that the balance of power flipped, without force or noise. Her response told the whole pool something the teens had been too blind to notice. She was not someone to be shoved, elbowed, or pushed around. She was someone trained to handle far worse than a group of loud teenagers. And with one controlled movement, she had shifted the entire dynamic. The teens stood frozen, the confidence they had worn like armor slipping away with every second. Their mouths hung open as they stared at the girl who had just redirected their friend without effort. The boy who threw the elbow tried to hide the tremor in his hands, but the shake was there, small and stubborn. It was the first real crack in their hardened posture, the moment when they finally understood that this was not a game or a chance to show off. The rules had changed, and they were on the wrong side of them. The girl did not advance on them. She did not loom or threaten. She simply stood in a balanced stance that signaled she was ready if they came at her again. Her calm held an edge now, not sharp or aggressive, but commanding. A man near the fence shook his head slowly, not in anger but in disbelief at how the scene had changed. A woman with a stroller pulled it closer to herself, relieved rather than worried. Even the lifeguard, who had been unsure how to intervene earlier, stood taller now that he understood the girl was not a threat, but the most controlled person on the deck. The girl's eyes moved over the group, not harshly but with a clarity that made the teens look away one by one. She was not seeking intimidation. She was checking to make sure no one else was about to make a bad decision. It was assessment, not dominance. Her breathing stayed steady, her posture precise, her attention sharp. You could see the difference between someone acting tough and someone prepared for real conflict. Toughness breaks when challenged. Training becomes even more apparent. The boy who hit her swallowed hard and tried to speak. The first attempt came out as a croak. He cleared his throat and tried again. His words were clumsy, mumbled, barely audible, but they carried a note he had not used all day. Respect. Not the forced kind, not the sarcastic kind. The kind that comes from understanding you misread a situation so badly that you ended up embarrassing yourself. His apology was not polished. It did not need to be. It was real, and that alone shifted the air around them. His friends stared at him, surprised and unsure, but the tension in their shoulders loosened as they realized he had chosen the only safe way to move forward. One of them echoed the apology. Another nodded without speaking. A third stepped back as if trying to retreat from the moment entirely. The girl did not smile or gloat. She did not snap back or accuse. She simply listened, her expression unchanged. She acknowledged their words with a small nod, not granting absolution but accepting the shift. She carried herself like someone who had been through situations where apologies came far too late or never came at all. So hearing one here, in a place like this, was not something she took lightly. Around the pool, people relaxed a little. Conversations resumed in soft fragments. Kids eased back into the water. The adults who had been bracing for chaos now let their shoulders drop. Even the lifeguard exhaled, tension leaving his posture in a visible wave. But the lesson hanging in the air was not lost on anyone. The teens had walked into a moment thinking they held all the power. They discovered that real strength did not announce itself with noise or attitude. It moved quietly, with purpose, without wasting a breath. The boy who had thrown the elbow no longer looked defiant. He looked like someone who finally understood the consequences he had narrowly avoided. He took another step back, giving her space this time, the kind of space that comes not from fear but from respect earned the hard way. His friends followed, their movements small and cautious, leaving the path open the way they should have from the start. As they retreated to the far side of the pool, the energy changed again. Not back to what it had been before, but to something steadier. The teens kept their voices low, no longer trying to impress each other with noise or bravado. They looked over occasionally, not with anger, but with the thoughtful awareness of people who had learned something important in a way they would not forget. The girl finally moved toward the lane she had been heading to all along. She walked with the same calm steps she had taken earlier, but the space around her shifted to accommodate her instead of resisting her. Every eye followed her not out of fear, but because they had witnessed something rare, a controlled, professional response to aggression handled with precision and restraint. The teens had walked in believing they could push anyone around. They walked away knowing they had met someone who could have handled them 100 different ways, but chose the one that taught them the most.